Hello there and welcome to video number 2, in which we're going to be looking at adaptations towards living on land in multiple groups of multicellular organisms. So when organisms move from living in the sea to living on land, they have to evolve a suite of different adaptations to meet the ecological challenges that are presented by a mode of life on land. Throughout the course of this lecture, we're going to be focusing on basically 3 groups, and it's on these 3 groups that I'm going to be introducing you to these adaptations. So those groups are the arthropods. We've met them in previous videos on this course. That's a group that includes the insects, the arachnids, and the myriapods, that's millipedes and centipedes in terms of land animals. We're going to be looking at the terrestrial vertebrates, and we're going to be looking at plants. So let's quickly whiz through the challenges that organisms that live on land face and how they have adapted to meet those challenges. The first of the challenges to living on land is that you need to maintain water. More precisely, we can say you have to have water homeostasis. And this has evolved, or adaptations to allow this have evolved in all of our major groups. In plants, plants take water and nutrients in via roots. You can see a beautiful rooting system for a tree on the top right-hand side here, and they have a vascular system to move nutrients around. To assist with their water retention, to reduce the amount of water they lose, they've got a series of adaptations that include waxy cuticle on their leaves. So you can see some leaves bottom right here. Often leaves will have a layer around on the surface made of waxes that will stop water from escaping. That layer we call the cuticle. But also they have to breathe, therefore they have openings in the bottom of their leaves called stomata, and you can see some stomata in green in this image bottom middle here. And the stomata have actually evolved to be able to open and close to minimize water loss while still allowing the plant to breathe. So that's a series of different adaptations in the group towards minimizing water loss. Vertebrates like us and like the puffins shown top middle here have evolved kidneys to remove waste. And indeed, I would highlight that we do that relatively inefficiently. Some vertebrates, such as these puffins and other birds, actually very effectively do this by excreting uric acid. So in bird poo, the white stuff that you see is actually uric acid, therefore minimizing the amount of water loss. All of this excretion in fish is done through the gills, and water loss didn't really matter and doesn't really matter towards modern fish, but kidneys allow us to get rid of our waste without losing too much liquid. In our arthropods, water homeostasis is achieved via their cuticle. This is their exoskeleton on the outside of the animals often has a layer which stops them losing water. They have spiracles through which they breathe. On this caterpillar, you can see these slits in the side here. That allows them to breathe, but those can close to minimize water loss from the inside of the organism. And they've also evolved the equivalent of our kidneys, things called Malpighian tubules, which you can see in this CT scan of a developing chrysalis, which I just put in because I really liked it, to be honest. You can see these long kind of stringy structures in red here. Those are the Malpighian tubules, which are used in these organisms to excrete waste whilst maintaining or recovering as much water as possible. So that's one challenge. Another challenge is the fact that in water you have buoyancy, but on land you have to defy gravity in a less buoyant medium. So plants have achieved this through mechanical support and anchorage. So for example, they've developed roots to anchor them to the ground, and they've developed wood in the trunk, which is a very, very strong structure, I suppose, a strong material to provide them the strength they need to be able to survive the effects of gravity. In arthropods, their exoskeleton is actually an exaptation towards life on land. You can see an example of a centipede here, and you can see that they've got this exoskeleton, which is something that we see in marine organisms as well, which made kind of the arthropods pre-adapted towards living on land. But we do see some other changes in their anatomy to reflect the challenges of life on land. So here you can see two diagrams of legs, and at the top is a typical aquatic organism which walks on the tip of its legs, whereas below it is a typical land-based organism. This one's actually a scorpion, and you can see that it bends the bottom of its foot into a different stance to allow locomotion on land. So arthropods have pre-adaptations towards defying gravity, but there have also been changes in their gross morphology to allow them to move on land. Also, I guess the other major group we need to mention is the vertebrates, and all of us have a skeleton. The skeleton provides us with the rigidity we need for our muscles to work and to allow us to support to live on land. And our skeleton is quite a lot stronger than in many of our aquatic cousins. So, that's another adaptation towards life on land, but this time in the vertebrates. So that's a second challenge that we've had to face. Another thing you have to deal with if you live on land is the fact that in the water column, the water protects you from the impact of UV light. So UV light can damage DNA as well as causing a range of other problems for living organisms. And in all of our major groups of eukaryotes that live on land, we see adaptations towards dealing with the impact of UV light. We see those in arthropods in the cuticle, which protects the inside of the animal from the ravages of UV light. And vertebrates have skin, typically with a range of different mechanisms that include pigmentation to help deal with the impact of UV light. In plants, the protective mechanisms include the deposition of UV-absorbing compounds in the outer tissues of say leaves, and also in the production of antioxidant systems to help repair some of the damage that UV light can cause. So all of these groups have independently evolved ways to deal with the risk, the risks, and indeed the reality of damage from UV light. Another challenge that organisms that live on land face is the need to reproduce. And in all of the groups that we're looking at, we see adaptations towards being able to reproduce more effectively on land. This is most clear perhaps in the plants, whose reproductive strategies as the group evolves show clear adaptations towards moving away from the need to have water to reproduce. A fine example of this is the contrast between mosses and seed plants. So mosses are amongst the earliest branching members of the plants, and they have a motile sperm that swims in a thin film of water or is splashed in water droplets, meaning that water is an integral part of the life cycle of the reproduction of a moss, hence you finding them often in moist places. In contrast to that, seed plants have pollen grains that contain the male gametes for the protection of the sperm. And so there's this clear evolution within the plants towards being better at reproducing on land. When it comes to animals in the marine realm, releasing eggs and sperm into the sea for external fertilization is a viable approach. There's no need to worry about that. It just works for reproduction, and many animals do it. But that's not true on land because gametes dry out or they're eaten by other organisms. And so in lots and lots of groups, we see a move towards internal fertilization. Vertebrates will often use internal fertilization in different groups, and eggs tend to have membranes to allow for gas exchange. Again, more adaptations towards life on land and reproduction on land in these groups. And in arthropods, as represented by this harvestman on the right-hand side here, these organisms tend to use packages of sperm known as spermatophores, which protect sperm to an extent from the harsh terrestrial environment. And that's often coupled with courtship rituals. And we see repeated evolution of internal fertilization across the arthropod tree of life when organisms are living on land in lots of different ways. It's really, really interesting. So that is reproduction on land. And a final and obvious point to make is that if you live on land, you have to be able to breathe. You have to be able to do gas exchange. In plants, gas exchange occurs often in the leaves, and we've already talked about stomata, pores on plants that open up and close to allow gases to be taken in and released as needed, whilst minimizing the loss of water. So this is how plants do their gaseous exchange. In arthropods, as shown on the right-hand side here, there are a number of different structures that have evolved for being able to breathe. The example I've given you here are tracheae. These are basically openings to the outside through things called spiracles, which then essentially take air through trachea and tracheoles directly into muscle tissue. And this is an arrangement you find in insects. The tracheae are shown in a developing butterfly chrysalis in blue here on the bottom. And in vertebrates, we have evolved lungs. These are actually modified swim bladders. This is in fish an internal gas-filled organ that contributes to the ability of many bony fish to control their buoyancy. And that allows those fish to stay at their current water depth without having to waste energy swimming. And it's these structures that have evolved into lungs in the land-based vertebrates, as represented by this horse in the middle here. So all in all, there are a series of parallel and really interesting ways to deal with the challenges that life on land presents. So that's some adaptations. Now, let's go in the next video to looking at how life has evolved on land over the last, well, more than 1 billion years. And so we're going to start in video number 3 with looking at Precambrian life on land. I'll see you there in just a second.